Hi, everyone. Welcome to this panel discussion. Today, we are going to be talking about the current effects of this COVID-19 pandemic on different organizations, and also discussing about the mitigations of different countries and the responses that have been carried out by different organizations. So today, we have 6 different guest speakers from 6 different countries. I would like to go ahead and introduce them to you. Our first guest speaker is Mr. Joseph Ziegler. He is the CEO of Astana Hub, and he's joining us from Kazakhstan. Our second guest speaker is Ms. Marika Thru. She's the CEO of Startup Estonia, joining us from Estonia. Our third guest speaker is Ms. Roberta Ludokin. She is the CEO of Startup Lithuania, joining us from Lithuania. Our fourth guest speaker is Mr. Aftantil Kastradze. He is the head of Georgia's Innovation and Technology Agency, joining us from Georgia. Our fifth guest speaker is Mr. Fariz Guliyev. He's the board member at Azerbaijan Innovation Agency. He's joining us from Azerbaijan. And our last guest speaker, sixth guest speaker, is Ms. Lejla Sediko. She's the lead of UNDP's Regional Innovation Center for Europe and Central Asia, and she's joining us from Turkey. And now I would like to go ahead and give the floor to our guest speakers and ask them to briefly introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their organizations and the things that they're doing right now. So first, Mr. Joseph Ziegler, could you please go ahead and a little bit talk about yourself and Astana Hub, what you're doing over there, and a little bit about your organization.
Sure, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm not used to being first with my last name starting with Z, so this is a great opportunity for me. My name is Dr. Joseph Ziegler. I am in charge of the Astana Hub within Nur-Sultan, Kazakhstan. We act as a center to bring in entrepreneurs and startups, but we also act as the driver for the country's innovation program. So we work with all the different startups in the country, in Kazakhstan, regardless of where they're at, whether they're in the capital or they're in other cities. And we also help draft a lot of the policies and give advice to the different ministries here, the Ministry for Innovation, on how to grow the startup ecosystem. My own background has been only startups my whole life. I started at a company a long, long time ago called Netscape, which makes me quite old. And I've had the, well, I would say a lot of luck. You know, I've been able to work with a lot of good people where I've actually sold 5 of my startups. So two IPOs on the NASDAQ and 3 private sales. And I've also acted as an investor. So Kazakhstan has brought me in to try to share some of my experiences with the country in general.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And now I would like to give floor to Ms. Marika Thru. She's the CEO of Startup Estonia, and ask her to introduce herself a little bit, talk about Startup Estonia and in general what you're doing over there.
Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be part of this conference, although online, unfortunately. Would have loved to visit Baku physically in June, but better than nothing, right? Like Zoom is always a good opportunity as well. But yes, Startup Estonia is our governmental program to boost and develop the Estonian startup ecosystem. And since 2015, we've been acting out as an umbrella organization for our startup ecosystem, bringing in, let's say, startup organizations from one side, and of course helping to message out the voice for the community to the government. So helping to lobby the startup friendly regulations as well. And of course, very important what we do is giving the regular statistics overviews and analysis, what is happening in the startup sector currently in Estonia. We have around 1,000 startups and employing more than 6,300 people by now. So we are more and more important as a separate economical sector in Estonia and needing a voice here.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Marika. And now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Roberta to talk a little bit about Startup Lithuania.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to participate in this event, especially in this international discussion. Hope we'll have a good time here and we'll share our experiences and activities. Startup Lithuania is a national startup ecosystem facilitator in Lithuania. It's also a governmental agency. We are trying to build bridges between different stakeholders in the ecosystem. We work very closely with the startups community, trying to hear their thoughts and struggles and to bring their problems to the government, also proposing different policy solutions and regulatory improvements. We also administrate startup visa program, trying to attract also non-European startups to Lithuania. And we collect the data about Lithuanian startups.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And now let's move to Mr. Untitled Chapter. He's the head of Georgia's Innovation and Technology Agency. So let's hear about this agency and their activities in Georgia.
Hello, everyone. First of all, it's my pleasure to be here with you. I would also prefer to be physically present in Baku, but unfortunately, we cannot travel at this period. I represent government of Georgia with regard to the innovation and technology development in our country. We are a fully governmental agency under Ministry of Economy and Sustainability. Our primary focus is to support innovative businesses, startups to develop their innovative ideas. And the main criteria how we are selecting the startups is all startups must have the global potential. Global scalability potential is one of the main criteria that we are looking. So we have all kinds of incentives, starting with the legal framework. Our agency is responsible to initiate legal amendments in the law in order to get better environment for the startup ecosystem and innovative ecosystem overall. We are also having access to finance program. We support from the World Bank Group here in Georgia, and we are providing micro grants, medium grants, and large grants for the, and all of them are matching grants because they need to match it from the private sector, from the investors. Otherwise, only governmental support will not work in the future. And we are not only focusing to startups, but we are also focusing on the technologies that is created in the universities and research institutions. And from the support of the European Union, we are having the technology transfer program. So we are one agency who is actually supporting all universities and research institutions to first determine and find interesting technologies who has a technology readiness level more than 4, and then we are supporting them to be commercialized and to be licensed to the private sector, to the businesses. So this is very shortly what our agency is doing.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Mr. Untitled Chapter. And now I would like to give floor to Mr. Faris Buliyev, who's the board member at Azerbaijan Innovation Agency, and to a little bit talk about their activities here in Azerbaijan.
Dear colleagues, thanks for having me in this conference. I'm really honored to be here. The agency, Innovation Agency of Azerbaijan, is operating under the Ministry of Communication, High Tech and Transportation, but it has its full ladder of auspices and financial and operational leadership to help the ecosystem and startup movement in Azerbaijan. I personally have graduated from various universities in the US, did my PhD. I'm specialized as a CPA in the financial auditing industry. So I'm more on the institutional and regulatory side of this agency, but we do have all the needed extensions to startups and acceleration, incubation, all the different types of the elements that needs to raise and incubate and help and care about the future of the startups. We have all the conflicting coverage of the public and private elements and aspects of the industry. So on one hand side, we're trying to help institutionalize and change the regulatory environment, liberalize them, to help the venture capital, institutional investments, private placements in order to boost the startup ecosystem. On the other hand, we're trying to work with the private entities, with the development stage enterprises or the startups to help them to kind of believe in what they're doing and help them with their future, whether they're coming with a social humanity backgrounds or technological, natural earth sciences and backgrounds. So we're trying to jumble them together, working with different startups from all around the place. We have helped raise capital for a couple of startups already who are successfully operating in US or somewhere else all around the globe. So our major aspect is to help solve the conflicting parties and aspects in order to realistically create the environment for the future of the venture capital investment in Azerbaijan. As you may already know, with this COVID, with the falling oil and gas prices, it is now getting more essential to be more substantive rather than formative when dealing with startup creation, startup movements. So it is getting really essential and crucial for the future of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Mr. Faris. And now I would like to give floor to Ms. Leila Sadiqo. She is the head of, she's the lead at UNDP's Regional Innovation Center for Europe and Central Asia. And we would like to hear more about UNDP's activities.
Thanks so much, and thanks for having me here today. It's a shame, I think, like all the previous speakers, it's a shame we're not in Baku together, but I guess this is a safer way to do things. So the Regional Innovation Center in Europe and Central Asia is based out of Istanbul, and we work on a number of different activities or a number of different range of services, including supporting the innovation ecosystem overall, applying a portfolio approach, and using innovative finance, digital technologies, and new data to solve development issues.
Thank you so much. So I would like to start with the question regarding this pandemic. As you know, as you're aware, the current situation with the pandemic is that it's pretty much affected every single country in the world. And there are certain countries that are ahead of others in terms of flattening the curve, but there are still some countries that are under the lockdown. So all the industries have been affected negatively, and one of those is, of course, is the startup ecosystem. So my question is right now, what is the effects of COVID-19 pandemic in the startup ecosystem in your country? So starting from Kazakhstan, so what is the situation in Kazakhstan right now? What is the startup ecosystem? How bad is it affected by the pandemic?
Well, today was the first day that we actually ended a state of emergency. So we're still actually under lockdown. So we're all still working from home, as you can see. So Kazakhstan has some advantages in this case, is that our population density is 1/2 of New Zealand. So we don't have a really big metropolis. And so the number of infections has been quite low, and the government's been very progressive, taking the same steps, I think, as everyone else. However, at the same time, we have been impacted by the drop in the price of oil. So for Kazakhstan, it's kind of a double whammy, that with the virus, of course, hitting the economy, and also the drop in the price of oil is also going to impact us quite a bit. So I see this actually for startups this is a great opportunity, because there's a pre-virus world out there. It's up to the beginning of 2020, and there's this completely different world now where people have worked remotely. We have to talk about what are we going to do if there's going to be a second wave coming in. People are talking about using blockchain, for example, to track people that are infected or people who have recovered. We're seeing a lot more emphasis on being able to deliver services remotely. And for Kazakhstan, that's a very different environment. We don't have a tradition of allowing remote work. It's still a bit rigid. but now that's starting to be broken down a little bit, so it's much more flexible. So I'm actually kind of excited where if we can get people more open to the ideas of doing telemedicine, teleeducation, this conference, for example, being able to put together these types of conferences very cost effectively means that we can exchange a lot more ideas. So I'm actually seeing a lot of upside once we're going to be able to kind of move forward on everything. I think this is a fantastic opportunity for local startups to fill in this gap that the economy is going to kind of leave open now. But we'll have to see too, because I think the impact on the world's economy, the amount of unemployment and other things that are about to happen, it hasn't caught up with us quite yet. So we have to be prepared for that. But as an entrepreneur, we look at everything as opportunities, right? I get excited about problems that can be solved, and this is an area that there's a lot of technology and a lot of startups that I think can have a really positive impact on the the post-COVID virus world.
Exactly. I mean, there's a saying that with every crisis comes an opportunity. So it's up to entrepreneurs to seek out those opportunities and to to create companies that can actually fulfill the needs of current people. I mean, fulfill the needs of the people in this current situation. And I would like to move to Estonia. Estonia is well known for its startup ecosystem. So how did the pandemic affect the ecosystem in Estonia?
Well, we don't see the exact pandemic results yet on the startup sector itself. If we look at the numbers, like we've pulled together the first quarter numbers for the startup companies, and of course we see still growth for the overall sector. Employment taxes rising, investments coming in, employing more of the people into the companies. But of course, we are realistic about that it's going to hit the startup sector also after the second quarter is now over. So what we've done in past couple of weeks is mapping out and analyzing, surveying the startups and asking themselves, like, what do they anticipate, what will be the reactions or the post-crisis for them. And what we know, of course, is that the most important part for the startups is, of course, investments, liquidity of their funds. So a lot of them said that they only have runway up to 5 months' time. So that is definitely going to be an issue, raising investments right now when we are in between very hectic period. We don't know what's going to happen, when it's going to be all over, if there's going to be a second wave on top of it. So definitely the investors are more thinking about taking the risk or not, or what kind of businesses to invest in, because the economy is, of course, changing. There is, as Joseph already mentioned, of course, there's a lot of opportunity out there, but also at the same time, might be that the businesses or the sectors you were interested in investing into before the pandemic might be disappearing right now. So it's I think that it's a bit of waiting time for the investors as well. Of course, most of them in the region here are saying that they are still investing and the capital is out there. But what we see already is that they are taking more time into making the decisions. And maybe the second thing what we see here in Estonia as well is that the startup mindset from the sector is actually getting closer towards the government and the governance. So that hackathon types of events are being organized by the government to understand how to quickly come and help the critical sectors with the problems and fast solutions from the startup sector. And I would be optimistic myself as well that startups are meant to be living in a fast-paced, agile environment. So if they can't live out from here, then it's also marking something, right? So there's going to be a lot of new startups rising, but of course, a lot of them, unfortunately, dying out as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for the feedback. Actually, one of the greatest responses I liked from Estonia was the Hectic Crisis hackathons that started in Estonia and they franchised it all over. So there were like a lot of different hackathons going on in different countries, not just in Europe, but in Asia and Africa as well. People coming together, trying to find solutions to the challenges that came with this pandemic. So that's something that needs to be appreciated, actually. And now I would like to move to Lithuania and ask a little bit about your startup ecosystem. What are the challenges that you are facing right now, and what are the biggest problems that you are foreseeing?
What we see at the moment is similar to Estonia. We've just collected the data about the first quarter, and we don't see very significant or very bad signs. The number of employees in startups are growing. Taxes they paid were bigger than in the fourth quarter of last year, so the numbers are quite good. And Startup Lithuania conducted a survey of startups at the end of March. So when all the quarantine and pandemic started in Lithuania. And also, of course, it really depends on the sector of the startup. So travel sector, some other startups really faced big problems, and I think most of the businesses, not only startups, faced a lot of difficulties and had to change their business models to adapt to the current situation. But interested us and surprised that there were quite a lot good signs in the survey, in the answers of the startups. A lot of them see opportunities. They indicated that it's a good time to grow, to overtake the competitors' market, competitors' clients, to find new ways, solutions, even to attract talents and new people to their teams. So hopefully everything will be quite good. And what we see in our ecosystem, as Marika also mentioned, investors quite positive also. They are still investing. We had 4 investment deals that were closed in April. And one of those was even into travel startups. So I think it's also a good indication at the moment.
Yes, definitely. Taking into consideration the fact that the number of investments in different countries around the world has declined because of the crisis, because investors are not sure how long this pandemic will last. So that's why they're not taking risks right now, and they are trying to wait and see how the things will develop. So I will have a separate question about this, but before that, I would like to move to Georgia. Georgia is like one of the countries that handled this situation with pandemic very good. So the numbers in Georgia are actually a lot less compared to others. So I would like to learn more about the startup ecosystem. I mean, how badly was the startup ecosystem affected by this pandemic?
Thank you for your question. Yes, indeed, government took all the necessary steps in advance in order to fight against the COVID challenges, and it is very difficult. Of course, the first and main target that the government has is to secure people's health. This is the most important right now job from all governments from all around the world. But at the same time, we need to save the economy, yes, because without economy, we cannot sustain the life here in Georgia. So, of course, the startup ecosystem has been affected, and as mainly not from the government side, because the government, even though we have a lot of big problems in the state budget, because business doesn't function fully now in Georgia, so they cannot pay taxes. So we will have at the end of the year problem with the budgets that previously was disclosed. But we did not take out any money from the startups, from the startup programs, for the innovative programs. programs. We even tripled our micro grant budget, specifically dedicated for the COVID challenges. So from the government side, they should not anticipate any problem. But as it was mentioned, right now, investment has stopped, not only in the startups, but in all sectors, even in traditional sectors, even in real estate. Now businesses are very careful about deciding whether to invest at all at this time. And this is very challenging because for the startups, it was always very, very difficult to raise investment. It's always a risky business. Now it became more difficult. So we are very much trying to somehow facilitate this process in order to still minimize risk as much as it's possible from the private investor side, because without private investor, you don't have startups. It does not depend how many money governments will spend. You need private investor in startups, otherwise you will not have a globally scalable business. So this is the main challenge that ecosystem has. And of course, some sectors had problem because some sectors cannot operate online, but mostly in the ICT field, startups who are in the development stage, they are continuing from online without any problem, but usually they had problem. But also the another thing is that for the startups, it's always COVID. The startups, they always have problems. So the startups have the ability to pivot sooner according to the challenges that they face all over the world. So the startups must act very fast, and this is something that we are supporting very much. Actually, we saw some of the startups who was developing differently their ideas, and after COVID, they completely pivoted and targeted to the COVID challenges. So this is what the startup should do. The startup does not have time to complain, they must act, and this is very important. So I think that in Georgia we see the spirit, and then it's very good.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, the startups, what makes startups different than the traditional business is their nature of agility, the way they adapt to the current situation. So yeah, that I totally agree that the startups that will adapt to this current pandemic situations will be more successful in the future. And now I would like to move to Azerbaijan and Mr. Faris Guliyev, who's a board member at Azerbaijan Innovation Agency. So how do you see the effects of COVID-19 in Azerbaijani startup ecosystem?
Well, thank you very much for the question. As all the other prior colleagues mentioned, there are specific and general issues that they face with startups in their regions. Azerbaijan is not an exception. Yet here, I'd like to take a little bit of a holistic approach to this problem. The strategy that the innovation agency tries to, implement on its startup movement here in Azerbaijan. One thing is, from the government and investment perspective, just like in Georgia, Lithuania, or any other place around the globe, Azerbaijan tries to not share the profit with the startups. They're all tax exempt, and we're trying to bring here more institutional investments, create exemplary fund, like a funds or private equity startup venture capital funds, to give a peace of mind to startups or future fundamental ideas that have future cash flow potential in the future, that they can share their experience with us. But definitely in this COVID-19 period, this has a general sort of reach to kind of stop the movement and keep the economy in doldrums for a period of time. That may go like 1 or 2 months, or maybe a little more. But our approach is that, as a rule of thumb, we're always trying to create the funds with success stories, so that other hybrids and startups can move in and share their experience with us and share some profit with us in the future. In this aspect, the agency sticks to its strategy of building investment perspective for fund liquidity for the startups. On the other hand, the operational risk that the startup community carries with their human element in it, with the regional element in it, is still in place. This COVID created a new sort of a peace of mind, a thought process that, you know, it sort of created a little bit of a home bias for investors and target companies and portfolio companies, because when you have a startup that tries to build its business in Georgia, somewhere in Lithuania, they would be more happy to make sure that they're connected to a more credible agency or to a more credible market, right? So agencies act on behalf of the governments, but markets are where they are. So we, in this manner, try to intermingle different regions from Asia, from Europe, from United States and Canada, in order to make sure that our startups have a sort of a credibility and sort of a connectivity to international markets, investment markets. So this is what we're trying to do right now, as we're sitting and isolating ourselves from the office work.
Thank you so much for detailed description. Now I would like to move to Turkey and Miss Leyla Sabiku. She works for UNDP, and I know that she's in charge of the regional innovation center, is in charge for Europe and Central Asia. I would like to know a little bit about your work and how the things are in Turkey in general.
So we're based out of Turkey. However, we do work across the region, and I was hoping to give you a bit of an overview in terms of all the work that's happening in the region and the movements that we're seeing there. Our primary focus, as you heard me say, is not on startups. However, we do work through a number of different programs in supporting startup ecosystems, innovators that are looking to address the issue. And there's three key ways in which we've been working around the region. One of them has been to support basically resource mobilization for innovators and startups alike, who are looking to address the short-term needs that are emerging as a result of the crisis. So you've seen, I'm sure, across the region, quite a bit of work, not across the region, around the world actually, maker spaces coming together, maker spaces, startups, especially in working on tech, designing solutions to address, shortages in masks, shortages in PPE, developing some kind of tracing mechanisms. So one of the things that we've been doing is actually work very closely with a number of them around the region to develop crowdfunding campaigns to be able to meet these short-term needs. I think the most recent one was in Kosovo. Another way in which we've been working with the ecosystem has been through hackathons, actually. Two of them held in Azerbaijan recently, where we've been looking at how we can design more inclusive services, but also respond to the pandemic by using technology and by being able to tap into the types of applications and the types of solutions that communities are already working on, rather than creating new ones. There is so I think overall, from our perspective, the way that things are emerging is that obviously we see, there's high uncertainty. So we're trying to work on one end of kind of addressing the short-term needs, but also starting to look at what does that horizon look like from a more medium-term to longer-term perspectives, and also what are the needs that are going to be coming in that period as well. So, which is very difficult to do in a space of high uncertainty as we have now. I think one of the things that's emerging is that obviously there is a need for a fast response, which is, and you'll hear me talk a little bit later on this, longer, but there is a need for really fast response, and communities of innovators, communities of startups are best positioned to do that. That being said, we know from experience that there is no single point solutions, and therefore we're looking at it more from a portfolio approach and starting to think actually how would we apply a portfolio approach to being able to a fast response as well. So putting in some systemic thinking into that as well. And I think fundamentally the most important feature that we're trying to get out of the work that we're doing across the region is to what extent we can use this as a learning mechanism. So as I said, there's no single point solutions. I think, we are beyond the point where we can expect unicorn ideas that are going to solve the crisis, because we don't really know what the crisis is going to look like 6 months from now and how it's going to be affecting different countries. So as a result, I think where we're investing a significant amount of resources, how we can quickly learn, and learning by design, from the investments that we're making in the different countries. So that's in brief.
Yeah, I think one of the advantages of UNDP is that it has offices in many countries, and you can, test and learn from different experiences and compare them, and come up with the better experience, with the better solutions that work. So that's, I think, one of the advantages of working for UNDP. And now we actually talked a little bit about the investments, and there's been mentioned that the runways for the startups has decreased, and the smart money is not in there, and investors are kind of hesitant in investing in startups. So I would like to touch this point and a little bit talk about this and ask questions about what are your plans to help your startups to stay afloat and stay alive, because as we don't know how long this process will last, we need to make sure that the startups actually don't die out. So what are your strategies? What are your plans to help your startups with the investment? So starting from Kazakhstan, so in terms of investment, are there any plans that you have in mind for your startups during this crisis?
I'm always the first one, huh? We should rotate around. In Kazakhstan, we're still very early stage. I would say probably at this conference with these speakers from Estonia and Georgia and all these great countries, I'd say we're probably the earliest stage in these markets. So private investment is still a big struggle for us. I wouldn't say that we have a large number of startups who have gotten private investment. We have some. We even have to run classes on how to invest, because it's not, there's not a history or a culture perhaps of doing this kind of private investment. So right now we are working with international venture capitalists who are looking to use Nur Sultan as their base for a greater Central Asia investment strategy. And they have funds and they're willing to take some risks. The other advantage we have here at Kazakhstan is that our burn rate is not that high. So for the level of infrastructure and the level of skills that you get, Kazakhstan is not an expensive place. And so luckily our startups can actually last quite a long time. I personally am not a fan of grants to startups. The way we are proposing our solution here is, instead of the government ever actually putting money directly into the startup, we should use this money to match with personal investors, private investors, so that the investors' risk is dropping, and we build more investors, and the investors should be picking the startups that they want to bet on. And so that's our approach right now. We work closely with local investors and international investors, helping them pick the best startups, and then we can start to bring in our fund matching. And that way, if we match, let's say 1-to-1, we put $100,000 into our fund matching. If the investor is getting some traction, that money will come back into that pool, and we can recycle it over and over again. So that money goes quite a bit farther. But everything's really, a lot of it's up in the air for us right now. One thing that we're working on too is we have a independent area called the Astana International Financial Center, which allows us to build on top of a framework which is based on Commonwealth countries. So that will allow startups to take money in different currencies. And it also is quite comfortable to international investors if they say, oh, okay, you're running British common law. It checks off, okay, I understand how my IP is protected. I understand this and that. And that makes it a lot easier for us to pursue international investors. But it remains to be seen, to be honest. We have to stay agile ourselves in order to help our startups. We have to be startups. So part of our job is to convince the government and our stakeholders to be more agile in themselves. And this way, I guess, the crisis is going to allow the tail to wag the dog a little bit, where we show the powers that be, look how agile startups are, they're able to do this, that, you need to kind of follow this approach. So we're kind of pushing innovation back up in the government.
Yeah, I think part of the work that falls under the responsibility of the accelerators, VC funds, and all these startup ecosystem players is to educate the investors as well, and educate them about this situation and help them to become more agile, because as they're working with startups, they themselves need to be agile in order to adapt to the current situation. And I would like to ask this question to Ms. Marika through. You have already mentioned that you don't experience any problems with the investments right now, but what do you think it's going to be like in 6 months from now? Because as we are not sure how long this process will continue, do you think you will have like you will have more problems with the investment, or do you think it's going to be the same?
Well, I think it's a mix of different things what we need to take into account. First of all, yes, saying that we see that startups are running on their critical runway right now, that a lot of them have indicated that they would need additional funding in between 2 to 5 months, shows that the investments need to be quite close and ready to be made. So one of the easiest things, of course, what we can do here in the ecosystem is help to matchmake the relevant startups and the interests of the investors. And those kind of matchmakings are already being done both from the government side, from Enterprise Estonia and Foreign Investment Agency, but also from the community itself. The local investors finding to match their portfolio startups with the next funding. Most closer, of course, for us are the Nordic investors, but actually looking worldwide to US, to Asian, to European investors to find what are the critical sectors they want to invest now into, because that, as I mentioned before, has slightly changed. That said, I would say that there is enough money available. It's just harder to maybe catch at this current moment, and the startups need to prove themselves better and their business model. But one thing for sure is that Estonian startups over time have been shown a lot of power in bootstrapping. That said, with a positive note, because as again my previous speaker said, is that even though Estonia, I might say, is a bit more mature with the startup sector, we still see that to attract foreign investments, it hasn't been that easy for us. It has been changing only in the last years. So to hold rate from Estonia, you needed to be quite creative. So we are pretty known to be bootstrappers from the early on, and using the old FFF, right, the family, fools, and friends, to raise our investments. I see that this is going to be happening even more now with the post-pandemic, so that we are going to be looking towards what will be the finish of the pandemic and the crisis, and when will it all go into more ordinary pace. Then definitely I believe that the market will do its own adjustments. As I said previously as well, it's normal that startups are dying at some point. So there are new ones which are going to come in, new verticals which are going to be observed and actually discovered. Everything goes online. We see that already happening, and the user behavior is changing. So there's going to be new startups popping up in those sectors, definitely. And maybe lastly is that from our side, what we see is that the Estonia has been known for its e-services, operating everything from online, doing it seamlessly. That, of course, is helping out currently in lockdown as well, when you need to run your business smoothly, fastly, and you can do that online. So we see that through the e-residency program, we have actually even more interest towards opening your virtual company in Estonia, operating it from Estonia. And we are now in couple of months changing also regulation to bring in foreign investments so that it would be even easier, even more available through online services.
So I think this pandemic has like a lot more benefits to Estonian ecosystem than the negativity, because there is a lot of things going on, and Estonia is actually, as you mentioned, is well known for its e-government systems and for remote work. And as the pandemic is here, I think there is more emphasis on remote as a vertical, and that we will actually, I believe that we will see a lot of startups that will have this vertical and that will rise out of this crisis. And now I would like to ask the same question to Lithuania, as you are borders. What is the situation with the investments, and how are you planning to help your startups to survive?
So as I mentioned previously, we have quite developed an active investment ecosystem in Lithuania, and 4 deals were closed last month. So we are thinking about encouraging local investments, how we could encourage ecosystem players to invest faster, maybe in this difficult time. We are thinking about some encouraging mechanism for private investors, for business angels to invest and to invest more actively. We are also thinking and proposing government maybe another co-investment fund to invest together with investment funds to share the risk and to give more opportunities for startups. Other from that, we as Startup Lithuania, we are trying to make access to finance easier for startups. So we created new section in our internet site where we put all active calls from European Union and encourage startups to participate in those programs, to apply for grants and try to use this opportunity also. We've also created what we've done from our side in this COVID time. So we also created a COVID guide for startups with all the measures that Lithuanian government created at this moment to support businesses and what startup could use from this. We organize different webinars with investors and try to talk to them what they expect from startups at this moment, how to apply, what to prepare, etc. And we believe that attracting foreign investments from international funds will be a little bit more difficult at the moment when the borders are closed and the flights are not going. So we are thinking about a platform for Lithuanian startups that are actively looking for investments to connect with international and local investors. That's mostly it, I think.
Yeah, I think creating a COVID guide for startup is a great idea because as the opportunities out there, there are some people who are coming into the startup ecosystem and trying to build their startup. So having information about all the privileges and all these benefits would help them a lot. So I think that's something that we can learn from Lithuania. Thank you so much. And yes, now I would like to move to Georgia. Mr. Aftandil Kastradze, you already mentioned that you have tripled the grants, the amount of grants for startups. So do you expect that this will be enough for startups, or what's the investment scenario will play out in Georgia, you think, in next 6 or 8 months?
Thank you for your question. And actually what we have tripled is only our budget for the micro grants. But we have also all other grants. We have also medium-sized grant. We have also large-sized grant, which is matching grants, 50-50 dollar-to-dollar investment up to $250,000 per startup. But this is just access to finance program. Of course, we had the challenges during the COVID. I mean, like 3 or 4 weeks ago, we could not talk about the investment strategy because there was so many questions. No one was ready to answer, and we did not know where it would lead. Right now, I think we as a government and we as a country overall, we actually did an amazing job to fight against the COVID, and we already are transforming now post-COVID era. How we can live with the COVID and still develop economy. Actually, we will be one of the first countries who will receive tourists very soon. So we are opening now our borders, but with, of course, the special checks during within the borders and etc. But we are opening our borders and we will be starting the normal life very soon. With regard to the support program for the startups, additional to the access to finance program, one of the most important programs that we are starting is that we invited international accelerators here in Georgia and 500 startups, which is one of the top accelerators in all over the world. They're startups. It's an open call. Now we are receiving applications from all over the world, from regions, from Georgia, and from other countries as well. So this is a very interesting process. And also in this process, we have also private investors joined together with the government of Georgia, and one of the biggest bank of the Georgia, private bank, is financing startups, and they are giving investment for all the startups who will be accepted in the 500 Startup Accelerator. This is a new opportunity and very important opportunity for the startups, global scalable startups, to develop their ideas with the, on the one hand, to have the access to finance, on the other hand, to have access to the mentorship, to the contact, to the investors, in order to develop their business ideas. So these 2 programs, and of course we have a lot of skills development programs. We have not stopped anything. We are doing everything in online with all the platforms that we can use, and we think that Georgia, together with also other sectors, of course, but innovation ecosystem will overcome these challenges. And I think we, everyone, I mean all the people, we will be stronger than we were before the COVID era, because we learned a lot of things during the process.
Yes, that's true. And I think the application for 500 startups you have just mentioned, I think the deadline for application is tomorrow for startups who are still considering this. I think there's only 1 day left, I guess.
It's not on tomorrow, it's 25th of May.
25th, okay, sorry. I thought it was, okay. So it's a good opportunity for startups to apply if they are considering 500 startups. And now I would like to move to Azerbaijan Innovation Agency. So what is the plan for Azerbaijan? I mean, in terms of investments for startups. So what should we expect? What should the ecosystem expect from Innovation Agency?
I'd like just to add up all the nuances mentioned, especially after Dale made a very important point here that all the countries surrounding this region should work together. With that postulate, I'd like to say that in this COVID period, we've come to understand that, unfortunately, Innovation Agency has always been acting on this, that your substance should always, be superior to the form, that whatever the startup is you're dealing with, or whatever the investment community is you're inviting into. So that entails a sort of a trust system, trust mechanism that can basically link an international investor with Azerbaijan, Georgia, Lithuania, Kazakhstan, and also Estonia and some other regions. The fact that I'm mentioning this here is, if you take a look at one of the fund of funds in Kazakhstan, is one of the biggest ones is Samruk Kazina. I'm pretty much sure Dr. Joseph would always mention that too. They have had a more than I guess 60 successful exits, each averaging $100 million in the last until the last year. But if you take a look at the composite of that fund, of those exits, most of them are high net worth individual quasi-public money. Well, if you have something like quasi-public, which is not especially private or exemplary, a private fund, then you always mention more of a public function into it, meaning you're not looking at the profitability element, or if it is profitable, it is more or less strategically aligned with the government and its politics or policy. You can't do this in international arena. And if you're trying to build a fund of let's say $1 billion or $500 million, you'd mostly like to create such a outset where the profit element, the return on investment, will be the most important one. And this is when you jumbo the most successful, most favorite startups with in the pre-money market with the investors. So that being said, just by adding all together, I'd like to say that every single unmet demand from every single side, stakeholders, let that be investors or startups or the government agencies or employment function for whatever the agency is, you have to put them all together at the same table and then make sure that every unmet demand for every part or party is met. This is when you create a success story. And whenever I talk to investors from all around the regions, I always tell them, let's be down to earth, let's be more pragmatic, let's match dollar to dollar, but at the same time at least on a portfolio company level, fund level. One thing is fund level, you're exempt from taxation, but you also have a problem with grayscale, gray list, offshore funds and all. So you want to make sure that you are paying the courtesy to the region that you're setting up the fund, and at the same time you're trying to meet with startups that are more favored, that are more able to carry themselves into the future. So this is such a subtle work that the agency deals with in Azerbaijan. And also with COVID, what I'd like to mention is, as Aftandil mentioned, maybe when bringing the technology into the region with the new startups, we might be able to convince all across these regions, the investor and the technology, that you don't only invest in Georgia, Estonia, or Lithuania, but have certain cash generating units, one in Georgia, one in Azerbaijan, one in Estonia, and make sure that all these regions are tied together and it's more realistic, so that investors get the trust mechanism, trust system, as I mentioned in the start of my talk.
Yeah, that's actually a very good idea to invest in different countries, because you never know where the best ideas will come from. That's also I think a risk strategy as well. And I would like to move to Ms. Leila Sadiku. The UNDP's, I know the UNDP has been supporting all these innovation initiatives, but in terms of investment, are there any programs, any activities that support startups in terms of getting investment?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. A few things that I wanted to mention. So a few things that I wanted to mention. So one of the angles as a response taking is how we can essentially
I think we are experiencing some kind of technical problems right now. Hello?
Sorry. Can you
Yes,
hear
I
me
think.
now?
Yes. I think you got disconnected.
My internet might have dropped in between. I apologize.
No problem.
So, actually, what I wanted to do, if it's possible, is share a piece of ongoing work that we've been doing, which allows us to basically look at what's happening in the pandemic more from a systemic perspective. So our team in Istanbul, together with the country offices, has been thinking around the lines on how we can increase the resilience of the system by looking at the entire ecosystem. So here, kind of bridging both the innovation ecosystem with the public sector as well. And what we've done, what you see right here, is a visualization which shows actually all the different aspects or all the different sides of the social system where the impact of the pandemic is felt. And when we move into supporting organizations, supporting basically ecosystems as well, what we'll be working on is mapping those intervention against against the portfolio, so that we can generate learning from it overall. Now, briefly, so just briefly, I think one opportunity that we've been currently crafting that may be relevant to this is developing an accelerator, which it looks at the solutions and focusing on not only on startups, but also working with the private sector, with startups, but also with civil society as well, and building their capabilities in terms of responding to the immediate and to the long-term crisis, to the long-term effects of the crisis as well. And some of the areas where we'll be looking for solutions around digital neighborhoods, decentralized economies, as well as social distancing and loneliness, and the impact of the role of data and digital identity as well. As a part of this effort, which we have not launched yet, but are currently in the process of launching and preparing, we'll be looking for solutions that come from, as I said, both from private sector as well as civil society organizations that are well grounded within the community, and that can be a combination of organizations that come, or actually can be a combination of civil society and private sector, and can also be organizations or startups that are coming from outside, but that are connected to the ecosystem and to the communities within the region of Europe and Central Asia. So this is something that we've been working together with country offices as well from a regional perspective, while at the same time, I would say around half of the country offices that we have, or half of the offices that we have around this region, have been running and will continue to run challenges, one of them being in Kyrgyzstan as well. We're running an accelerator program as well in Serbia. There's an ongoing accelerator program taking place in Armenia as well. So there's a number of different opportunities where we're working on. I think from our perspective, what's really important is to have a more systemic perspective and to look at the solutions that are being generated as a whole rather than as individual solutions. While obviously innovators and civil society organizations will be placed and will be building their capabilities to go into the world and do what they do best and solve problems the way that they do. What we're also interested to see is how we can connect between them and what can we learn across them, and not only within the work that we're doing. And in that sense, in fact, what's super important to us is also to link with other initiatives that are supporting that are supporting the cause in this case, and to see how we can leverage that and how we can share information and share learnings across.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for the presentation as well, I guess. And my last question, as we have only 25 minutes left, my last question is about the post-pandemic era. I know that many things will change and the world is not going to be the same after the pandemic is over. So what's your organization's, do you have any strategies that you think will be in place after this crisis is over? So do you have any changes in the strategy for post-pandemic era? So starting from Kazakhstan, for Astana Hub, is there what are the plans for post-pandemic era?
It's difficult. I would say the leadership here, they've got a lot of things on their plate right now, and changing their innovation plans is probably not the absolute highest priority right now, as it is probably, many places. We have a lot to worry about. But what we're really looking at now too is, as mentioned before, we have to get as much help internationally. It is a big community, and we're learning to connect with people. And so we're really virtualizing everything at this point. I don't think that there's going to be many events this year. I don't think there's going to be a lot of people are going to invest in actually having physical events, considering everything that's going on. And so we are looking at, can we virtualize our roadshow? Can we get our startups exposure to some of the more mature startup ecosystems without travel? And we're also in the process of virtualizing really all of our workshops, our accelerator program, everything that we can, and just trying to reduce any kind of friction it's going to take to do things remotely. This is really our next step. Other than that, it's difficult to tell. We have to kind of sell the idea that there will probably be no travel this year, which is disappointing to our startups, because we have a big roadshow all planned, all these great places we were going to go to, yes. And now we're going to have to find a way to virtualize that. And that's basically where we are.
Thank you so much. I guess that's the case with every country. So we don't really know if the borders are going to open or not. So let's move to Estonia. Do you have any post-pandemic strategy for your startup ecosystem, for your organization?
To be honest, there is definitely a lot of short-term activities which we're going to be doing together with the ecosystem to mitigate the crisis results and to ease in the lockdown kind of, because yes, of course, we also realize that there's not going to be so much traveling, and how to be still connected with the global ecosystems, investors, and organizations while doing that fully online. But in terms of strategic points, we're not actually taking too much of a different path right now because of the pandemic. We are currently with Startup Estonia putting together from next year our next 7-year program and the activities related to that. And it has always been for us very sector agnostic development, so that we see overall how the startup sector is growing. We wanna push forward with the same similar activities, be more ambitious, and of course, besides the COVID-19 crisis, we can't forget that we are in between a climate crisis. So mitigating the results of the climate crisis, sustainability, and searching for actually solving the problems related to that is a big part of our development of the startup ecosystem in the next period of 7 years. But that said, additionally, we looked at our startup ecosystem would be as a very friendly environment. So what we say, as I said before, all of the e-services available so that it would be little red tape, bureaucracy-free, startup-friendly business environment for our startups. And then very important for us, diversity as well, so that we see that different parts of the community are also related and very connected to the startup ecosystem. That not only female, male, not only the gender, but also educational backgrounds, cultural, historical backgrounds, and of course, very important age groups that we see, not only young people interested in the startup world, but also different age groups, 50 plus especially. And then connectivity to global like-minded startup ecosystems is going to be an important keyword there, definitely.
Yes, that's great to hear. Actually, startup is a notion that's global. So I think there needs to be some kind of global connection between the different ecosystems so that they can learn from each other and encourage each other as well. Let's move to Lithuania. So do you have any post-pandemic strategy that you have in mind, or is it too early to think about it?
I think it's too early even to talk about the end of pandemic. We don't know what's awaiting us in autumn. At the moment, we are working very short-mindedly. We are trying to feel the pulse of our startup ecosystem and to reflect their needs. At the moment, we moved all our activities online, hoping that we will be able to host some events, some networking, knowledge sharing someday, maybe in summer. But main goal at the moment, I think, is to feel, to know what struggles startups are facing, what problems they are facing, what we could do in a short time right now, what could be done in the nearest future. And similar to Startup Estonia, we are at the moment, we were also working on our next upcoming year strategy. So I think it will be also affected by the situation that we have currently.
Definitely, yes. I hope the summer will be different than it's right now. The borders are open and everything, but as you mentioned, yes, we don't really know, and it's kind of early to predict what's going to happen after 2 years. Thank you so much. Now, I would like to move to Georgia. As you said, that you are planning to open your borders and you're planning to welcome some tourists. So are you planning to change your strategy as well for the tourism, for the startups ecosystem for post-pandemic era, or is it gonna be the same?
Thank you once again for your question. And before I answer this question, I would like to respond what Faris mentioned. And I think he's absolutely correct when we are talking about the regional, when you have the regional views, that's Georgia, Azerbaijan. I think this is something that when we work together in this ecosystem, we will have the better result for our startups, for our investors. And there were several cases when we created the Olympiads or competition when Azerbaijani startups participated. And I would like to say that the quality of the Azerbaijani startups are very good. And we are always welcome to them. And same goes to the Georgian startups who want to do business in Azerbaijan or from Azerbaijan to Desari in all over the world. So this is something that we need to find, and also to work together with investors, because more or less, we have a lot of similarities how the ecosystems are working. With regard to your question and future plans, definitely. First of all, I would like to say that I don't think there will be end of this, what we have right now. So there is no end. So we need to find a way how we are living with this. Today it's a COVID-19, another day it may be another virus, but actually the humanity really understood that this is our part of the life and how we can continue work and how we can live with this kind of situations. And one thing is good that we are coming back in innovative ecosystem. I'm opening also tech parks 2 days from today. From Wednesday, we are opening Tbilisi, Tel Aviv, and Zugdidi Tech Park. First stage, we are opening only laboratory parts where we have equipment. People are working for the prototypes. We are opening for them. All my staff will be equipped with the respiratory masks and like all the equipment that's necessary with the gloves and etc. in order to serve the people who have innovative ideas. And in the later stage, we will be opening fully the co-working spaces and etc. But of course, there will be certain requirement how you can behave during workplace, and like you need to clean your hands like very soon and etc. I mean, all of these things will be part of our life now and next few years at least, maybe even forever, it will be part of our life. I mean, we are changing our behavior, we are changing how we will work, how we will live, how we will move, how we will travel and everything. So it's better to get used as soon as possible and move forward.
Definitely. I mean, as you mentioned, I totally agree that you never know, because 10 years ago we had this Ebola virus, and before that we had this SARS virus, and now we have coronavirus, and we don't know what we're going to get in 10 years from now. And it's always safe to take that into consideration and to build products and startups that actually can help us to cope with these problems if they arise. Now I would like to move to ask a question. I would like to ask a question, address the same question to Mr. Faris Guliyev, and ask about Azerbaijan Innovation Agency's strategies. I mean, what are the plans and strategies for post-pandemic era for Azerbaijani startup ecosystem?
Well, thank you, Vishal. Thank you for the question. What I can say, I mean, I believe that the individual social solution should be the major focal point when we deal with or direct into the startups and whatever we do. So individual social solution means every person needs to be a law-obeying, reporting in nature, mutually respective and realistic in what he or she is doing, whether it is a startup, a newbie, or it is an affluent investor. So all we have to do is, I think, we have more of a social connecting function into each other, because the regions are close. You're in neighborhood with Georgia. We come from the same almost history with the Baltic countries, Estonia, Lithuania. Kazakhstan is our other side of the Caspian Sea. With using all these traditional business culture perspectives and mosaicing them together, I believe on an individual social level we can basically become successful as individuals, but we have to work in teams. So I'd like to get the contacts from every single colleague of this conference who takes part in this conference, and then keep in touch with them beginning from the next day, and see what we can do together. And this is my basic personal approach. With regards to the question as to what is going to be the new ways of dealing with the post-pandemic period, I think that there is not any one size fits all kind of a approach to this question. I think it's all about stewardship, more of a non-profit stewardship on the profit-seeking venture capital activities. So it's more of a stewardship. It's like the example of the Israel, for example, or Silicon Valley. It is not just an agency or private parties. If you take a look at the history of Silicon Valley, it is all about the government expenditure, government contracting first they started with, and then they moved out. So investments by itself is not enough to build the fantasy, implement the fantasy into the future. But it's all well balanced efforts that we have to put together. And I believe a human power. We can kind of overcome this COVID isolation, if you will, right? So I believe in the trust. I believe in mutual respect, a social solution, individual social solution, and I would personally, on behalf of the agency, I'll work to convince our startups more into what they're doing, on a belief level, on a soft level. And then when they come more convinced throughout these hard times, we will help them, make them more favorite, help them bootstrap, help them, with pre-money valuation, all that. So we'll basically keep the startup movements in tonus. We'll help them do what they do all day and every day, and we'll try to kind of be with them on this situation. I wouldn't mind to working with you guys from all different regions. We may come up with hybrid startups, with hybrid investments. Let all the new investing community help us together, and let them believe in us in a more convinced manner, in a more credible manner, if you will. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And And finally, I would like to learn a little bit more about the UNDP's approach to this. Is there any strategy? Is there any plan for post-pandemic era at UNDP?
So I think like everybody else, we're learning by doing, and we're waiting and trying to do active sense making, I would say, to see how are the cascading effects being felt, how do they come on the economic, social, political angle, and how are they shifting, actually, I would say, creating new vulnerabilities probably that we're not aware before, and kind of surfacing those interconnectedness. But in that process, I think there's a number of things that we take, it's more like, I'd say, a way of thinking and doing that we're taking into that space, at least from our innovation perspective. One is, transformation in this is happening. So we've been talking about strategic risk and transformation and how can we induce transformation. In fact, we've seen then an external event, I wouldn't say an unpredictable, but one that we certainly were not prepared for, has created a transformative effect along how people behave, along how our institutions function, and along also how the economy responds to it. So in a sense, I think what we're thinking where we are now is to say from two angles. One is mitigating, understanding, building the resilience across the system, I would say, both for public institutions, because we're not only, well, we're not a startup focused agency or center from our perspective, but looking at how we can build that resilience, how we can tap into the ecosystem in a continuous way, support the ecosystem, and grow the solutions there, and connect, obviously leverage that networking capacity that we have by being in the amount of countries that we are, as well as, I'd say, building the resilience. So building a capability to handle a similar shock, because as I think previous speakers were noting, one, that this is a long emergency, so this will go on probably for a while until everybody's been vaccinated. The vaccine is out and everybody's been vaccinated, but also, as I said, this is not unpredictable. There were people who've been talking about superbugs for a while. So, we can expect, and the climate crisis is the next emergency, or it's actually not the next emergency, it's an emergency already. So we need to look at how do we use those kind of tools and momentum that is being generated now to be able to drive us through and prepare better for what's coming up after it. I think one space at which we're looking in particular is urban spaces. And I think there is an intersection between here, a very important intersection between public spaces, digitalization, and the role that startups have as, I'd say, lead innovators in reshaping, in particular, life in urban spaces, because we've seen new business models come up in this period, and I think some of that will stay. We're seeing that people are connecting in a different way. Some of that is very likely to stay, and we're seeing, I think, new ways of solidarity and empathy being built as well, which would be good if it will continue coming out of the crisis as well. But I think more importantly, online education, online learning, online education, medicine, all of these transitions will essentially have an impact. Online work will have an impact also on how public infrastructure is used. And so I think that'll be an interesting space for us as well to continue observing and continue working with the ecosystem. And that I think yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for the answer. And I think we have only 5 minutes left. So if there's any questions from the audience, I will ask the questions, but it seems like we don't have any questions so far. Just take the opportunity. We have only 5 minutes left. What would be your last words to the startups?
Is that me or Joseph?
Yeah, let's start with Joseph.
Okay.
Well, that to be first. I'm sorry.
That's cool.
I guess I'd say, I think that the pre-COVID world is gone, and now we're looking at a completely new place. And I would encourage startups to reevaluate what they're doing, what problems they're solving. We have a lot of problems in the world now that I think startups can contribute greatly to, highly impact the quality of people's lives. And I think this is also a good time for people to look at, you know, what problems can they solve. We can't always depend on the powers that be. The leadership is going to be able to solve everything. You know, I think one thing about entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs is they're empowered, and they're the kind of people who want to solve problems, and kinds of people who want to contribute. And this is a great time to be able to do that and to do it with a global impact.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And Ms. Marika, do you have any words for startups that are watching this?
This is definitely not a 5-minute quick question, but I mean, I would suggest that do the same thing as you startups have always done, finding your niche, moving fast, but more importantly, maybe being more creative in finding your actual market, because it might not be anymore the same as you were thinking when you were ideating, and finding your friends also in the government. Because it might be that typically startups are far away from the governments, but what we see more and more is that governments are now more than ever eager to find innovation and looking for it also in the startup sector. So finding the relevant stakeholders there and making friends and testing your ideas.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And Ms. Roberta, what would be your answer to this question?
I want to remind all the startup founders that a lot of great companies, great businesses were born during crisis.
Right.
We experienced before. So I believe that you are the ones that would create something new, to create solutions that will help us to get out of this situation and to find new businesses, new business models, and innovative businesses that will make an impact.
Thank you.
Fingers crossed.
Hopefully. And Mr. Aftandil?
Well, I will only say to them what they're supposed to do is that they must always find opportunities to any problems, and this is how they are doing in their daily life. So there is always a lot of pivoting they need to do, a lot of the challenges that they will have, but never give up. And as Roberta mentioned, yes, there was during the crisis we had cases when like very interesting startups came out. For example, in 2018, when it was global financial crisis, Airbnb, WhatsApp, and this kind of big companies created during this period. So
Uber,
now new Airbnb and this kind of companies, but we need to see. But that's why they need to keep their entrepreneurial and startup spirit, and that would be my only advice.
Definitely, never giving up. Actually, that's the message, because mostly people are pessimistic about this, but you have to be strong and provide solutions. And Mr. Faris Gouliet?
Yes, joining to all the answer choices of the colleagues. And what I'm going to tell is that this isolation, this COVID, will bring more new breath to this startup movements all around the globe. The new ones, the more successful ones, will come up. We just need to help them be more persistent. We should help them believe in what they believe, and we should do whatever we need to do to make them be successful.
Thank you. And Ms. Leila Sadiqa, lastly, it's your floor.
So it's very hard to add anything after everything that's been said so far, but I think this is an opportunity for collective intelligence and collective action, and that doesn't mean that everything needs to be done together, but it is really a moment where every part of society is mobilized, essentially, I think, to respond to what is happening. And I think, some of the biggest companies and most interesting ideas, from Newton's time, have come out of periods of quarantine and isolation. So nothing less is expected now.
Yes, definitely. I would like to thank you all for taking your time. We've spent an hour and a half discussing these problems, and I would like to thank you all for your valuable insights. And take care wherever you are, and hopefully next time we will meet together in Baku and discuss this in a physical place. I don't mind.
Thank you very much for hosting us. We appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Take care.
Take care.